let's do a book haul. I got some books, well, some just before, some just after Christmas. I'm actually technically waiting on a couple more that haven't arrived, and I don't know when they're going to arrive. So I'm going to do this anyway. I've got, I guess, technically some graphic novels, some sci-fi fantasy, and some D&D stuff. And this kind of represents, I suppose, I mean, I didn't get many books over the autumn on the whole, so this represents a chunk of stuff from the middle of December onwards up to now. So the first thing I'm going to talk, let's do graphic novels or graphic novel, fiction, D&D. So, Bad Machinery, Volume 1, The Case of the Team Spirit by John Allison. There's a ghost haunting the kids' favourite football team or something. So this is, John Allison wrote webcomics, writes webcomics, now writes print as well. And I just got off reading a long overdue read of Giant Days Volume 3, which is a trade bind up of his Giant Days series, which ran for several years. And Giant Days is about the university exploits of her big sister and some other friends. And this is all part of this shared world, which is sometimes sort of fantasy and mystery and horror oriented, and is sometimes straight and set real world in terms of its tropes. It's a really interesting mixture. You could call it the Scary Go Round universe, is a pretty common one. Scary Go Round was the big famous webcomic he did for 7 years in the noughties, and he's now done way more since. So in that sense, it's not that significant maybe, but I was reflecting on how, as I ordered this, which I read these at the time when they're published from 2009 onwards. I remember reading the very first panel of this, and ordering another Giant Days, and ordering a side story with Charlotte there, a modern one, again hard copy, and I'm waiting for those two. I think I'm getting one tomorrow, the tracker says. And I think I was reflecting on how I don't feel terribly nostalgic about many things. I'm not not in the way that people might assume someone who's massive into classic fiction and literary tradition would be like, oh, that's just nostalgia. Not really. I don't think often. I don't want to live in the past. I don't think often about my own kind of like, I remember those days when I was so happy when I was young. And I wouldn't kind of usually think about the noughties as a time that I'd look back on with any fondness or nostalgia. On the whole, I made some good friends. I had some good experiences, obviously. But as a teen, which I was for most of the noughties, I wouldn't have characterised myself as particularly self-realised or happy or anything like that. But something that I do have big nostalgia for, in a way, I realised reading Giant Days Volume 3, was how much I enjoyed. I read a few webcomics at the time, and I still read Penny Arcade, and some others faded out and I realised they weren't very good. But how much affection I had for this kind of like this set of stories. Scary Go Round for a couple of years, then Bad Machinery, and then side stories attached to the universe. The whole universe started in 1998 with Bobbins, which is a bit of English, particularly northern slang for everything's gone a bit bobbins means everything's gone terrible. They're funny, they are approachable. I love his art style and his humour, and I like the world created by him. I went to school in the place he now lives. He's from Yorkshire, I think, originally, but I went to school in the place he now lives, which is a weird connection. But yeah, I'm looking forward to more of these. And I like this format too. You can see that there's a way in which this is kind of, you can see that's a day's comic, can't you? Pretty much. Depending on exactly how he laid it out at any one time. But you can see there's, it's partly preserving the original format. But I think it's fun that it's a flip book. So yeah, that is my one graphic novel representing 3, because I'm expecting another 2. I would look into him if you're interested in fairly approachable sequential art that is funny, and particularly I think in Scary Go Round and Bad Machinery, where and some of the connected stories like Mordawa and Destroy History, where you're getting in sci-fi and fantasy concepts in a fairly sometimes gonzo way, but often also with more seriousness and pathos than you'd expect. So yeah, I'd recommend that. So now we want to have a look at some fiction. So first, I've got the kind of 3 categories of fiction here, in terms of 3 mini categories for what we talk about today. First, this is just completionism, really. Hatful of Sky, Tiffany Aching, book 2 in the Discworld series. I've read every Discworld book. I've read many of them twice, and I'm rereading them now. And Tiffany Pratchett stopped writing Witches books with Granny Weatherwax after Carpe Jugulum. And The Witch is very popular. Granny was very popular, but he didn't keep writing them. And there are reasons why that is obviously why he needed to do something else. But he started writing Witches, including connections to Granny Weatherwax, again with a young adult series starring Tiffany Aching, which was his second set of young adult books after The Amazing Morris and His Educated Rodents, which I have a copy of. I don't know where it is. There's that and The Last Hero, which is this fully illustrated, like, graphic novel. I guess it's an illustrated novel rather than a graphic novel. But yeah, I don't know where they are, which worries me. I can probably get them again. Certainly I can get Morris easily. But yeah, I read this on a borrowed copy because my nephew had it, I think, after having read the first one. And it just curiously is not one I owned. Every other one I'd been bought, or eventually as I grew up bought myself. So yeah, that's just completionism. But I'm looking forward in due time to getting to that and reading it. Next we have a sci-fi. In fact, the rest of the fiction is all sci-fi. So we've had a couple of fantasy, now sci-fi. Here, the Neuromancer books, the Sprawl trilogy. There's Burning Chrome, that's short stories. There's Mona Lisa Overdrive. There's Count Zero. And there's Neuromancer. I already have this version of Neuromancer, but it was cheaper to actually just buy a shrink-wrapped set of these than buy them individually. So I'm going to trade or sell or whatever Neuromancer. If you're interested in my copy, feel free to get in touch. I could probably send it to you or whatever. But yeah, I love Neuromancer. It's one of my books of the year. I liked its creativity, its intensity, its style. And Count Zero, I know one of my friends here said he thought I'd enjoy. And they get good reviews. These books, Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive, both get good reviews. Burning Chrome is the story in which Gibson first coined the term cyberspace. Neuromancer is where the term The Matrix comes from. So I'm going to read Count Zero, I think, this year is the plan. Again, looking forward to those. They're bought with a purpose. This is also a set of books. The final 3 fiction books are also ones bought with a purpose, which was that I read 3 Mars novels last year. By that I mean sci-fi novels about Mars, plus some short stories. So I read Gods of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which was great. That's John Carter of Mars. Sword and Planet, science fantasy. But I mean, to call it science fantasy is probably to make it fit our category of hard sci-fi. It is sci-fi. It's trying to address the idea of how we interact with science and discovery, basically, and themes around that and knowledge. Then I read, what was it called? The Sword of something. A book by Sword of Rhiannon by Lee Brackett, which I really enjoyed, and I read many of her short stories too in her Sword and Planet world, her setting, which is semi-connected, and some of it definitely has continuity, some of it is semi-discontinuous, but you can see it's all against the same background. And I thought Sword of Rhiannon was, though I didn't think it hit my top 10 of the year. Maybe it did actually. Sword of Rhiannon was really good and was like Burroughs, is Sword and Planet, but there was much more heft to it. It maybe wasn't as stylistically pure, though she's a good writer, but it had a lot more heft and grit to it, and I really enjoyed it. And you could see that there was a maturity of intellect and creation there. And then I read Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson from the 90s, which is that was not a Hugo winner, it was a Nebula winner, but its sequels won the Hugo. And that was hard sci-fi, very much on the kind of emphasis on the deadness of Mars and the challenges facing human settlement. And so you have these very different kind of, like, there are aliens on Mars, there used to be seas on Mars, this is a civilized planet much like ours, and then you have one that's the opposite. So I bought 3 books, all really on the latter side, the second of those categories, but I bought Blue Mars, which is the third of Robinson's Mars trilogy. I'm going to read Green Mars at least this year, which is the second book. But this is, you can imagine, is obviously about further stages in what he'd call the future history of Mars, and dealing with the issues of terraforming and the politics, the ecology, the philosophy, the psychology of that. I loved Red Mars. It was one of my books of the year again. And so, yeah. And Blue Mars and Green Mars both won the Hugo. I think both of them did, yeah. They both won the Hugo. So we're talking at a time where the Hugo, I think, meant a lot in terms of how much of the genres it covered. So, yeah, that's maybe not even for this year, but it's going to get somewhere. I should say part of my interest here was I really thought it'd be interesting to make a video at some point, and we're talking like a half-hour, 40-minute video or something, but some reasonably long discussion of Mars in fiction and the way in which we imagine our, the neighbour who we perceive as most like ours and like us. So another great Martian book, of course, is Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis, which is about, in his Sword and Planet, kind of technically Sword and Planet universe, and that's a really interesting vision of Mars too. And you've got H.G. Wells with War of the Worlds. I think the way in which we see Mars in speculative fiction is that there is a real subgenre there. It is a particular trope, as strong as virtually any other trope, and I think it's something I want to explore and talk about. But yeah, so that's why I got that. But I also got 2 Mars books, standalones, which I haven't read. The Martian by Andy Weir. I've watched the film with Mitt Doman, and I thought it was really good. It's something, and it's really well-reviewed book, isn't it? And the other one is, I know some friends of mine read this last year, The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. The last time I read Bradbury, I was a teenager, younger than when I was reading Scaring Around. And I've no doubt I'll enjoy Bradbury on the return. Great author. But that one as a sort of, that's a short story collection functionally, and it may be as approachable and digestible at that level. You can read 1 or 2 and then be like, okay, that's some of his style, that's some of how he's approaching the subject. But all of those tend toward not necessarily the dead planet, but toward the hard planet side of the genre and the complexity. And Bradbury, I think, is a transitional figure with, from what I understand of his vision of Mars as a place which perhaps has been inhabited, perhaps hasn't, and perhaps is livable, perhaps isn't. Maybe the second story or something is about everyone going insane because there's a massive existential crisis from being off Earth or something like that. So you can see he's a bridge between the Sword and Planet stuff, which, say, Brackett, Lewis, and Burroughs represent, and he is, but he's not yet into the sort of the really high concept stuff and gritty, high concept but gritty detail stuff that you see in Kim Stanley Robinson, or, as far as I understand it, Andy Weir. So yeah, that is the fiction side of this. Finally, I'll do this fairly quickly. D&D, I decided to get into some Al-Qadim stuff, which is a setting inspired partly by call it Arabian Middle Eastern history, and particularly the Arabian Peninsula, but as much or far more by things like the 1001 Tales and other of the legends that come out of that milieu. And so, there's things which you can see that, as with how D&D back in the day dealt with Japanese, particularly culture in Oriental adventures, there are things which come across very strangely, but also some really interesting and sensitive treatments and absorptions of culture, and the contrast to Western mythologies is sometimes actually much better drawn than I think people might give it credit for. So I got over a few blocks of time, I think I might have got some of this, to be fair, maybe as far back as November. I got the Al-Qadim rulebook. That's an add-on for 2nd edition. I got the big setting book, Land of Fate. You can see, by the way, there's a ninja jumping onto a magic carpet. You see where we're going. There is a djinn jumping out of the desert at a guy riding a horse. Complete Shia's Handbook, which is really a magic handbook for the setting. And then 3 box set adventures. Interesting thing about Al-Qadim was that there was a limited run of, like, we want to do these 10 projects or 11 projects, rather than like, oh, let's see if it's successful, what else could we produce, compared to Forgotten Realms in the 90s, which is saturated with just, some of which is really good, but saturated with material based on the fact it's popular. It seems easy to kind of get material together for. For Al-Qadim, technically in the realms, but not really, they had a particular plan, and I'd say also contrasting to some degree with things like Dark Sun or Spelljammer, where it's evidently there's no plan in the line. Here there was a tight plan, they fulfilled it, they ended it. as long as there was enough success, they'd complete the plan, and they completed the plan. And it does lead to a certain relative slimness and a conciseness, which is lacking sometimes in that era of setting publishing. The setting, so each of these setting adventures has like an area of the world it details, and then some adventures to do in it. So 101 adventures in Muluk, the City of Kings, and at the surrounding area there. And then Ruined Kingdoms, which has a really cool picture, really cool statue of like a hippo god or something there, which my son really enjoyed looking at, which is about the Ruined Kingdoms, including Deliz, the gateway city. I got that in Shrink, and I got Caravans in Shrink, which is, yeah, again, you can see the trope it's trying to hit here. These are all attempting to hit certain tropes and ideas. One, Golden Voyages, which is really rare and hard to get at an acceptable price, is Sinbad. You know, each of them is trying to hit a particular trope. Successfully or not, I need to spend more time thinking about. I haven't opened this yet. I'm going to. I'm not, again, I think I'm not a collector. I am a user of these things. I think you should look after things. You should steward your possessions. But I think that, you know, all is going to be dust eventually. And so helping things to their telos is the way. But yeah, because it's fun to open things with people. I opened Ruined Kingdoms with my oldest son, for instance, and he loved looking at the maps. You know, handing it on to the next generation. Caravans is about the high desert. And that area. And there are another couple of those, I think 3 of those box sets or something, which when you see that the prices range, like there's 5 or 6 or 7-fold differences between the cheapest and the most expensive of the kind of core products, and you can, on eBay I'm talking about, and you can always wait as well. It does just mean sometimes I pick stuff up spottily. Birthright is the same, that some of it is kind of acceptable, some of it you can wait and see, and some of it you just never see at kind of a normal price, or virtually never. So yeah, that is what I've gotten recently. I don't know. I imagine I will get some more stuff, some more novels soon, but I don't know when. But partly because my TBR doesn't have loads of stuff I don't own, so I'll only be buying a few more, you know, every now and then, rather than like 20 a month, Andrew. So yeah, that's what I've got. What have you bought recently in terms of books? What are you looking forward to getting? Are there any deep dives? Like I've got this Martian selection. Are there any deep dives you're going on in terms of if you want to read all by a particular author or everything in a particular genre? Tell me in the comments. Till next time.